So the first show that actually had a guest was the second one, James Emanuel. And it's interesting, just yesterday I saw on Vimeo, uh, someone saw my, I'm not sure whether, well, do I have Omniversica on Vimeo? I think I do. So it was either the Omniversica show with James, or it was the show that I did about James last year. A cousin of James that lives in James Emanuel that lives in Denver emailed me or contacted me through Vimeo, and I sent something back to her. It was about a month ago. She contacted me, thanking me for doing the show. So James Emanuel is a poet that I've written a number of pieces about, done a couple of shows about. I've got him reading some poems, some poem videos I've done of him. I've been trying to promote him. He died, I think, in late 2013, and it was a very, very good interview. He appeared with Jean Magren, who also appeared later on the Dan Schneider video interview show on James after his death. Jean had
One of the things that you should mention too is he later does a written interview. The intellect seems much more apparent there than it does in this audio interview, because while he does make some points here or there, you and Art more or less dominate the scenario. Art seems a little bit overwhelmed towards the end that he got to speak with James Emanuel, but I don't see the the deep intellect that I'm able to read within his written interview that I see in the audio interview.
Well, yeah, and this is partly Dave Wesley. The shows had gone offline in 2005 or so. They were gone from Source and Quarter. Source and Quarter, if you type it up, is sort of like a shell site now. I don't think he has anything up there of any value. What kind of annoyed me and also annoyed Art was that Dave Wesley never pushed these shows. I wouldn't have mind even doing from Texas remotely, doing shows remotely for a few more years. I think we could have established an identity, and who knows, we may have even been able to make some money off of these shows eventually. The way podcasts do now. Who knows? I could have had 12, 13 years of doing this and made a half decent living doing it. I don't know. But Dave Wesley didn't have the foresight or the vision to see that that's the way it should go. He didn't anticipate YouTube, I guess, and he valued more of his sort of gossipy little radio shows with these bad musicians from Minneapolis than he did these shows. As far as James, yeah, I mean, you don't get as much here. Same thing with Jean Magren. It's basically introducing James. I don't think at that time James had done any kind of shows extended like this, and so he was calling in from Paris. Well, we had called him in. Wesley had called to Paris and gotten him. So it was actually using telephone stuff. So, I mean, it's good. I think it's a very good show. It's not a great show. The written interview certainly displays James more. And it's a good thing that I got the written interview in '07 at the time I did, because probably within a couple of years after that, James's mind tended to he wasn't what he was. I'm not saying that he had gone senile, but he didn't seem to be as in touch with reality in certain ways. He and Jean Magren, for example, had a falling out the last few years before James's death. To this day, I don't know the reason why, and Magren himself says he has no idea the reason why James seemed to get paranoid or whatnot. And also, I think James in this Omniversica, a woman who he was involved with, Godelieve Simone, appears there as well. She was considered like one of the two girlfriends that he had later in life. A woman named Marie France was another one. So it's interesting. It's one of those things though that 50 or 100 years from now, if James gets due as a major 20th century American poet, it'll be something that people can be free to use, long after I and you and the people alive today does. So it's good in that sense.
The other thing to mention about that too is James did a early 90s interview that I have heard, and he seemed to be full of much more fired, so to speak, than he was in this interview.
That's the one I put up. That's the one I put up. The Lost interview.
Perhaps that was the only one I could find, so likely you did put it up. But he seems to be full of energy, full on attack towards the establishment, as opposed to here when he's kind of he's the wise old man going into senility, as you said, that he doesn't seem to possess the strength. There's a notable moment where you ask him to name some bad poets, and he almost
Well, yeah, and
refuses to mention anyone.
that's typical of people in academia. And James had spent decades in academia, it should be noted. He did often rail about what he called the blacklist, meaning black academics who blacklisted him from being published in the U.S. I can believe that. I don't know the reality of that because James also, after his son was killed by a cop, left the U.S. And so by going across the Atlantic and not really publishing that much. And to be fair, James's poetry, basically his productive poetry period, it probably ends around 1990. He started doing these jazz haiku, which range from passable to execrable. No one in their right mind is going to talk about jazz haiku as being the major stuff that James did. James liked to claim that he had come up with the idea of jazz haiku, which is on the face of it false, because I knew people in the early mid 80s when I started getting into poetry who were doing haikus speaking to jazz. James may have a claim to say that he coined the term jazz haiku, but in no way, shape, nor form did he invent the idea of a jazz haiku. That's just nonsense. But James may not have known this since he had left America around the time that was happening. Probably wasn't active in the arts in terms of readings, probably because he was in academia for years before that. So he was in effect, he insulated himself from the very organ, the academia that could have promoted him. He drew away, and that's sort of like spurning the National Football League. If you're a great college football player here in America, there's only one place that you can make it nowadays because the MFA power structure is set up in that very way, just to screw with people. So that's basically the interview with James. It was a good, solid interview, but it was nothing special.